I've never been a fan of the Drag Race is rigged conversation, and I promise that this is not any shade towards other creators. This is in relation to how the fans interpret the show and talk about how Drag Race is quote-unquote rigged, or that there's riggery.
Rigor Morris, girl!
And I've never really vibed with that particular phrasing because, in my opinion, Drag Race at the end of the day is an entertainment form of television. It's not a real competition, in my opinion. The word rigged implies that there is some type of trickery afoot. The word riggery, in pageantry specifically, implies that the contestants are not being judged on their merits, but rather by some predetermined effort to make them win, or that they are going to be given passes on things that they did technically incorrect in order to make them win. And that sounds a lot like Drag Race in its own right. There are some winners I think that we look at that maybe don't deserve it as much as somebody else because they quite frankly didn't do as good in the competition. And drag at its origins does originate from pageant culture, so I think it's very natural to assume that pageantry and Drag Race are kind of integral to each other, and that if pageants are rigged, then Drag Race must therefore also be rigged. That doesn't resonate with me because when I look at Drag Race, what I see is scripted reality TV. In the same way that I think something like Chopped is also scripted reality TV. You've got the character that comes in that's super confident and headstrong. Typically doesn't win because they're just a little too cocky. And then there's that one restaurant owner who's been fighting for their life to prove that they're just as good as every other chef that is the one that gets pushed to the end because they're looking to sell a narrative. The Food Network is trying to package anybody can cook, everybody's valid, everyone has a space at this dinner table. In the same way that I think Drag Race does that. Drag Race looks at the kind of culture of drag and what is happening now, and they try to find someone who fits in that narrative. Kind of pick at the beginning and say, okay, y'all have what we're looking for this season, and we're gonna make sure that you get to the end because you are the type of brand that we're looking for. And they're looking for an archetype, and as people start to branch into the archetypes they're looking for, they'll snipe off the other ones in that row who aren't doing what they're looking for. So a good example of a more recent season was Sam Starr as someone who does pageantry versus Crystal Envy, who also is very pageantry glam. Crystal wasn't really branching into anything else, where Sam was showing that she had this weird, quirky oddity behind her. So Crystal's not necessary. And I think in the very early seasons, up until about season 4, I think the pageantry of Drag Race was still kind of pure and untouched. I think those were genuine, real competitions. Whereby about All Stars 1 and season 5, I think the show started to realize that they had something and that they could rely more on television tropes and create a show. Because Drag Race is a drag show, drag shows are supposed to be entertaining. If everybody that makes it to the finale are just good at drag, you don't have much dynamic TV. Yes, these are queens who are good at their craft, maybe not good at the competition aspects, but they're good at the presentation part. Maybe have stronger aesthetics than other people in the cast. But their storylines and what they're presenting to the TV, their archetypes, are kind of muted. You need to have your characters that make sense to the audience so that your show is entertaining. It's very different than something like Project Runway, where the personality traits of these players don't really matter at the end of the day. It's about who's good at fashion. The fashion designers, the good ones, make it to the end. Drag Race is looking for an entertainer, an overall superstar, someone who can do the RuPaul's Supermodel of the World thing, but also have their own filter on drag and their own flavor that they present to the audience. And so you can't just pick someone who's just good at drag because that might not be the flavor that they're looking for, because they're looking for an overall package. When you go to the nightclub, the girl who's on the mic might not be the prettiest or the most glamorous or even the most entertaining lip syncer, but they're great on a mic. They're good with engaging with the audience. They can get people hyped up for the show. They can get people buying drinks. They can get people buying food. They are good at maybe being so bombastic that they make you believe that someone who's coming out is gonna be really spectacular even if they're a big yawn fest. And those are marks of a good entertainer versus a good performer. when you bring in a character at the beginning who is meant to make it to the end, the challenges follow along suit. A girl comes in that is very good at comedy, and so the challenges surround comedy so that they can succeed, so they can get to the end with very little resistance. And again, that sounds and seems like rigging, but it's creating good TV. Because if you bring in a contestant and just give them all the normal challenges in a row, starting out with a creation challenge, and then an improv, and then snatch game, it's not super dynamic TV. Great examples of bad seasons is UK versus the World 1, where the challenges were just plain and boring. And you look at the end of that where Blue wins and it's super unsatisfying. All the challenges that were presented were not things that Blue was necessarily super good at. So we as an audience have this dissonance, feeling like Blue didn't earn it or deserve it because we saw other characters maybe do better in those challenges than she did. And that's a good example of bad TV storytelling. We look at a season that a lot of people consider very good, which is season 5. Jinx is really good at improv, and so we see her succeed at every single turn. Meanwhile, characters like Roxy are struggling really hard to get through them and is trying with a lot of resistance to get there, but makes it to the end. And then we see Alaska gliding through these and getting overshadowed by Jinx most of the time. It makes for really great TV because the characters are going through experiences that naturally show how good they are. Again, not really riggery. It's television making. It's semi-scripted reality TV in the same way that Food Network shows you this struggling restaurateur who wants to prove that they're just as good as everybody else and beats out the seasoned professional. And we root for this person because their story matches up with the genuine parts of the competition, which is the struggle of getting through the challenges. And I think when we look at what is considered riggery, it's more than anything production's hands on the wheel. They're driving the car firmly. They give us the illusion that there's choice in the All-Star seasons by them picking lipsticks, when we know in fact that production knows exactly what lipstick they picked. So in an instance where maybe Alaska has chosen Tatiana's name and Katya has chosen Roxy's name, they don't want Roxy to go home. So they cut out the parts where Katya's doing good, they highlight Alaska, and they show us at the end Alaska winning, and she picks Tatiana's name. They're not going to pick Katya, who chose her name to go home next. In the regular mainline seasons, they give us the illusion that some of these girls are doing quite bad. Season 14 Snatch Game, where they highlighted only the bad parts of the Snatch Game to bolster in the idea that it was a terrible Snatch Game and all of them had to lip sync to make up for how bad they were. It's following a narrative here that gives us good television. Because again, if they just showed us what happened and they don't try and cut out any of the parts that don't facilitate their story, we'll get a competition, but is it good TV? A lot of people don't remember the drama that happens on Project Runway because they weren't focusing on that. They weren't highlighting those problems. They were focused on the fashion. The parts that people remember that were crazy about Top Model were the parts where Tyra was going on rampages and yelling at the girls, or, well, they were doing inappropriate challenges. But that has nothing to do with being a model. The parts that people remember about Drag Race are these iconic moments, the fights, the explosions, the blow-ups, the girls battling each other in Untucked and then eventually getting to lip sync for the win. And this makes for dynamic and good TV. And they just cut out the parts that they don't need that don't tell that story. Because it's not about finding a good performer. It's about finding a good entertainer. Creating this narrative around the girls, creating challenges that facilitate archetypes making it to the end. Like if they want a pageant girl, a comedy girl, a quirky girl, and an improv girl to make it to the end, the challenges facilitate that. Is it rigged that some of these girls make it to the end when they are what the show is looking for? I don't think so. I think it's heavy-handed for sure. I think it is overproduced for sure. Someone is picked to be on the mic not because they're the best of the cast, but because they're good with engaging and connecting with audiences. They are good at making people buy the thing the bar is selling. One girl in the club may be the best performer and makes the most money, but she's trash garbage at connecting with audiences on a vocal level. And I think Drag Race is hyper aware of these things because they're creating TV not just for queer people, but also for straight audiences. They need to appeal to a wide demographic, and in that, the archetypes they're looking for are meant to connect with multiple people. When a contestant is given passes on things that others aren't, it's because they are doing a good job at that entertainment aspect, and they need them to go further. They can't snipe them off even if they're performing bad because they're entertaining well. And so with all that being said, I'm not a fan of the word rigged or riggery because I just don't think it's applicable to the Drag Race sphere. I think there are elements of riggery, like when characters are set up together, like Jeremy and Redacted Noodles. But even then, I don't necessarily look at that as riggery. That's good television. When you set up two rivals to battle it out in a challenge and see if they're going to be able to overcome their differences and be stronger than their critiques, that's great TV. When you put characters like Rosé and Tina who don't do anything with each other except for make each other look awful,
Damn, this is some scary shit.
you've got bad TV. And so the season has to kind of gloss over that challenge because they didn't do what production wanted them to do. And so some things feel maybe less satisfying from a viewer standpoint because the story didn't follow through. The story didn't connect to the end where it was going. And so again, I don't think that's riggery. I think it's just television in the making. And sometimes TV storylines don't work out. Sometimes TV storylines have great payoff. And I think what Drag Race is trying to do is give us good payoffs every single season. And I think this is ultimately Drag Race's problem, is that it produces its show with the end goal in mind, rather than trying to let the show happen naturally and organically. Drag Race is trying to reward very specific behavior and is looking for a specific archetype. So with all that being said, I don't think that Drag Race is rigged. I think it's overproduced. I think it is a well-crafted machine that is designed to package and give us a plate that we can easily digest and go home and talk about it with all of our friends and family, buy tickets to their shows, and keep us wanting to come back to collect from the Drag Race machine. Thank you for watching, and we'll see y'all on the flip.